Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninjas here. We're going to do a slightly different video in this case, namely I'm going to look at some video game trinkets I just picked up. Now, what might look like a version of the D-Arts Mega Man X figure, the original armor, is actually a complete bootleg. This actually started popping up on eBay fairly recently. I believe it's most of the time it's labeled as either SHF figures or SHF D-Arts China version of the figure as it's popping up on eBay right now. Generally, this is a fake. To give you an idea of how to tell and some of the key differences, let's bring in a real one. This is a legitimate Japanese import version of the D-Arts figure for the full Armor X. And even just looking from the front here, you can tell there's a few things missing and out of place here. Namely, the Capcom logo and Bandai logo are completely missing from the fake version here. Some of the die-cut features that should be removed in the box are, despite the fact they're actually cut out in the shape, they're still in place here. Also, another thing which I will bring up for a little closer thing. Well, they have a little marking here. The Capcom copyright information is missing, and also you'll notice as I go through this, the print quality on the box is at a much lower resolution than the real product should be. And everything's a lot more saturated in terms of color, so that's definitely something that pops up as off. Looking at the bottom of the box here, we have some basic copyright and content information here, so generally speaking, a little bit more information to that. Jason's own logo is popping up here, and UPC barcode that is completely stripped off the bottom here. What this actually is a lower, kind of a blown up version of the copyright information up here, made to stretch and fill in the whole blank space. Now, the sides of the boxes are, well, you can tell once again this one's just more saturated in color, so it just looks off. This one's, well, it's a little muted in color. It's still closer to the real model. The back is a little more obvious. You have a few more cases where they have some die cuts that didn't get removed as they were supposed to be. Generally speaking, especially for the fonts, you're going to find, because of the resolution issue I was mentioning earlier, these are just much lower quality fonts. It's much harder to read on this box, these are the way it's printed out, than it has been on the original one. Well, there are clearly some examples right here where you just can't read it, but it's still much easier to go by. Whereas here, everything's a little more faded out. Well, I should say faded up, hard to read just because of the resolution there. But of course, that's just the outside of the box. In a second, after a jump cut, we're just going to start opening this one up to get an idea of what we're looking at here. Pardon the slight change in audio quality here, but I'm actually doing a re-recording of various segments here so I can actually clean up my thoughts a bit, as well as kind of shorten this up because my runtime was running a bit long. What I'm currently doing on video right now is I'm actually opening up one of the two bootleg boxes in this case, just to get a fresh impression of what's supposed to be in here. And one of the first things that I will be noticing as I'm opening this up is that the slightly glossy or shiny backing of a cardboard paper that should be behind the figures will actually be missing in this case, just as I had kind of estimated when I was originally looking through the box there. So that's not a huge surprise there, and neither is the fact that the small little instruction paper that explains how to switch out the arms and face plates, as well as how to actually use the buster attachments, well, buster fire attachments I should say, is also going to be missing in this case. Subsequently, what I didn't notice until later is the actual empty buster arm that fits those buster attachments is also missing and has not been included here. I also checked on the other figure and it is also missing in this case, so unfortunately that seems to be a standard issue with these particular bootlegs. So if you did want to use the buster attachments, you're unfortunately going to have to modify the one that is currently on there in order to actually make use of them. You're not losing much because they don't actually include the little translucent red gem in there, but it's still a bit of annoyance if you actually want to use all the attachments that are present here. At this point, I've included the full Armor X for a little bit more of a fair comparison of what a realistic or a legitimate figure should look like, but just from the base, the Bootleg X does have a little bit of a nice weight to it, but it is lighter than the normal one just because it is using a bit of a cheaper grade of plastic, something I'll make note of a little more on later. In terms of the casting, there is some issues with blasting here just because from the mold making process they didn't exactly clean it up proper. What I'll say, the joints for the most part tend to be pretty good. The knees were a little bit loose from my finding, but Unfortunately, I wish I could say the same about the shoulder joints. While they're able to move left and right fair enough, something that I'll be noting and probably pointing out in a second is I was unable to move it actually in a vertical sense, meaning I could not move the joints up and down. In this case, just to make sure it wasn't just limited to the one figure I had, I actually went and opened the second figure that I had just to make sure that it wasn't just a one-off fluke, and unfortunately, that's something that's consistent in both of them. Unfortunately, these figures, you're going to need to modify them in order to get a proper shoulder movement out of it. And that's probably because of the casting method. You notice here the arm pops off here. That would seem like a bit of a problem, but if I'm being quite frank, that is actually something that pops right back in, and as I'm about to demonstrate, the real versions aren't exactly perfect themselves. Right out the box, the leg came off on the real Full Armor X. Mind you, it pops right back on, but still, just a proof of concept. The original figures are not without flaws either. So that pops right back on. Something that I'll make a note of in a second is I'm actually pointing out the quality of the plastic, namely the paint label. Most of the thing, while there is a bit of a paste there, there's still a bit of a more of a glossy paint coat on here, and a bit of a glossier plastic just because of the higher grade. That's not present on my Bootleg X here. Most of it's cast in the original thing. For the most part, it doesn't look that bad, but there are noticeable issues with painting in the lines there. It's a little more noticeable on the shoulder cuff in this case, as well as kind of the wrist cuffs. It's not something that can't be fixed. You can touch it up certainly, but that's some out-of-the-box modification you're going to need to do there. Alright, now we're starting to look at the assorted accessories that did come with the figure. In this case, this is actually one of X's alternate faces, mainly his neutral face, which is supposed to be the default one on the figure, but for some reason they shipped it with the more grimace face on there. Comparing with Full Armor X here, they're fairly similar. It's a pretty clean casting. What I'll say is the decals on all the faces that came with Bootleg X are all slightly off kilter. Namely, they seem to be a little lower on the face than they should be sitting on here, and on one of the other faces, I think the angry face here, the dip at the white part is a bit lower, and the pink at the mouth is also a bit lighter than it should be. They're not huge issues, but it's worth keeping in mind. A little nitpicky, perhaps. Moving on now, I'm starting to look at his hands here. Notably, a more matte plastic than the rest of the toy here, which is something I found curious. I'll be comparing with the Full Armor X hands because the Full Armor X hands are basically just painted versions of the same thing. You'll notice it's a much glossier coat on the Full Armor X here because, well, it is painted as opposed to the dry white, bone white of the casted one. Also, flashing issues on the Bootleg X hands might be an issue to kind of insert and change hands later on. Now we're looking where things start kind of falling apart in accessory-wise. You can tell which one is the real Spreadfire and which one's the fake. The fake one is noticeably more compact because they just kind of cast it in two pieces. It actually breaks in the middle there, and is a noticeably it's kind of a painted plastic, so to speak. It's not an actual cast in translucent yellow, but painted that way. And the part where the gunfire is supposed to meet up with the actual Buster hand is cast in one piece, and that's actually the same with the charge shot here, which is also kind of more loosely painted. You can see the flask issues on the top there. It's connected, it's one piece. It's not supposed to be one piece here, but I guess whatever made it cheaper to ship there. In a second I'll be grabbing the Full Armor charge shot. It's the same basic principle, but as you're going to see there, the little flasking bit will actually be as a separate piece, which also has a little piece of plastic thing dividing in between in this case. But as you can see from the way it rotates, yeah, it's a separate cast piece. It's much neater, and even the details are sharper. So that's kind of the end result of kind of doing it on the cheap. Alright, now time for some closing thoughts on the figure. Generally speaking, I know I didn't pay top dollar on these, so I'm not exactly crushed by some of the glaring issues on here. It would have been really nice to have the shoulders on these things more movable than what they really are here. They're unfortunately not nearly as posable as they should be, but for considering I can see the flashing issues with the molding issues here that likely are the cause, it's probable that it's not going to be too much work to fix. But if you want something right out of the bat, that's something you didn't want to deal with. It's good for a good idle position, but to get it posable, you're going to need to do some work on this figure. So the shoulders are definitely a bit of an issue. The joints on the rest of them are kind of okay. You're going to need to touch up the paint on the neck a bit. Unfortunately, in terms of the buster attachments, they didn't provide that one essential empty spot there. So you will have to do some modification work on the sole buster unit that they did give you there in order to drill a hole so you can actually make use of it, which kind of stinks, but it's not going to be the hardest thing in the world to do if you really want to do that and make use of it. What I will say though is if you're looking for a base for customizing figures, as long as you know what you're getting into with the shoulders and stuff that you're going to need to fix and do a little more work on, it's not the worst base for customization, I think. Generally, you're going to be able to use this to kind of make X size or similar size figures, so you can definitely get something like a good axle out of that. You can probably work out a nice command mission out of this without breaking the bank on spending on a real D-Arch figure. So that's something to keep in mind. And generally, if you wanted just something as a bit of a filler without paying the real gray market price on the next figure, you could do worse. This is not the worst expenditure of money that I've ever done. I wish I could have had the shoulders and stuff on that and a fully movable figure out the gate, but like I said, I was actually expecting worse out of this whole thing. So at least on some parts, I'm pleasantly surprised, but I knew what I was getting into on that. So hopefully this, for anyone who might be interested in looking on this stuff on eBay yourself, once again, I believe it's SHF Figure Arts. They usually label them as the China version. If you do want to take a look at this yourself and you want to kind of take a gamble on it, buyer beware, you know what you're getting into in this case. I think I've said my piece on here, so thanks for watching. I hope some of you watching this find some of this information useful, at least if you're considering on getting this on your own time. Feel free to drop any comments, or if you have any questions that I might have overlooked in terms of review here, please drop them down. I'll try to comment back and answer any questions that do come up. And thanks for watching. Catch you all later.